Deploy that patch and you're out. Crispin Thorne's voice cut through the emergency server room like a blade. His face was red, veins bulging at his temples as he jabbed his finger toward my workstation. I don't care what your diagnostics say, Vance. We have investors in the city watching, and I'm not going to let some paranoid systems architect derail this launch. My hands hovered over the keyboard. 12 years. 12 years of perfect uptime, 0 critical failures, and a reputation that had taken me from a Sheffield further education college to the heart of one of the United Kingdom's most ambitious tech infrastructure companies. And now this moment, this single choice that would either save everything or cost me the career I'd built from nothing. I looked at the error logs one more time. The red warnings screamed across my screen, each one a ticking time bomb buried deep in the system architecture. Then I looked at Crispin, the vice president of engineering, who'd spent the last 6 months making my life miserable, who saw my caution as weakness and my thoroughness as cowardice. "You don't understand what you're asking," I said quietly. "What I understand," he snarled, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive cologne that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage in the Peak District. "Is that you're one keystroke away from the job center?" I took a breath, then I deployed the patch anyway. The screen flashed green. Implementation successful. Every alarm in my head was ringing, but I'd done what 12 years of experience told me was right. Then I logged off. I stood up, grabbed my personal items from my desk drawer, and walked out of that server room while Crispin was still sputtering threats behind me. What happened next didn't just ruin Crispin Thorne, it brought down an empire. Welcome to Payback Office Channel, where we dive deep into the stories of workplace injustice and the sweet, undeniable karma that follows. I'm sharing this story because it's mine, every devastating, vindicating moment of it. If you're someone who believes that integrity still matters in the corporate world, that doing the right thing eventually pays off even when it costs you everything first, then you're in the right place. We're building a community here, working our way to 7,000 subscribers who understand that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. If that resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. We're glad you're here. My name is Elowen Vance. Until that March afternoon, I was the senior systems architect at Vanguard Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech infrastructure companies in Britain. My title might sound impressive, but I didn't come from money or old-school connections. I grew up in a council estate in Sheffield where half the streetlights didn't work and community meant everything because all we had was each other. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep me in school. I learned early that empathy isn't a weakness, it's survival. When you've watched your neighbors share their last groceries, when you've seen your mother cry over the council tax but still slip 20 pounds to the family next door whose power got shut off, you understand something that no business school can teach you. People matter more than profit margins. That understanding shaped everything about how I approached my work, my teams, and eventually the choice that changed everything. Vanguard Technologies wasn't always the corporate machine it became. When I joined 12 years ago, we were a scrappy startup in a converted warehouse with big dreams and bigger hearts. Our founder, Alaric Penhaligon, had this vision of building infrastructure technology that would democratize access to enterprise-level computing power. "Technology should be a bridge, not a barrier," he'd say during our all-hands meetings. I started as a junior developer, fresh out of my higher national diploma program and a coding boot camp I'd saved for 2 years to afford. Alaric took a chance on me when bigger names with Oxbridge credentials were applying. He saw something in my approach, the way I thought about systems, not just as code, but as ecosystems where every function affected real people on the other end. I worked my way up through talent, persistence, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. By year 5, I was leading the infrastructure security team. By year 8, I designed the core architecture for what would become Vanguard's flagship product, the Nexus platform, a cloud infrastructure system that handled everything from data processing to real-time analytics for over 3,000 corporate clients worldwide. 12 years of flawless operation, 0 critical system failures under my watch. Our uptime percentage was the envy of the industry. I'd built redundancies upon redundancies, fail-safes that caught problems before they became catastrophes, and monitoring systems that could predict issues before they manifested. It wasn't magic. It was meticulous, exhausting, relentless attention to every detail and every possible point of failure. But companies change. Success attracts a different kind of leadership. Crispin Thorne joined Vanguard 2 years ago as the new VP of Engineering, brought in by the board after we'd gone public, and Alaric had been gently pushed into a ceremonial chairman role. Crispin came from one of those London-based global giants where move fast and break things wasn't just a motto, it was religion. He had an MBA from a top-tier business school, a CV full of companies he disrupted, and absolutely zero patience for what he called legacy thinking. From day one, we clashed. Where I saw necessary caution, he saw inefficiency. Where I insisted on thorough testing cycles, he demanded rapid deployment. Where I built teams through mentorship and collaboration, he ruled through intimidation and ultimatums. The problem with Vanguard, he announced during his first month at a leadership meeting I'll never forget, is that we've gotten soft, comfortable. He paused for effect. We're sitting on technology that could be generating 3 times the revenue if we were just willing to push harder, move faster, and stop letting fear dictate our innovation timeline. He was looking directly at me when he said fear. Over the following months, Crispin systematically dismantled the careful processes we'd built. He cut testing cycles in half, then in half again. He merged teams to increase efficiency, which really meant overworking fewer people. He brought in his own people, young, hungry developers who worshipped his aggressive style and didn't question his directives, and he hated that I kept questioning him. The trouble started 3 months before that final confrontation. Crispin had been pushing what he called Project Velocity, a massive system overhaul that would allow Vanguard to handle 5 times our current client load. On paper, it was ambitious and impressive. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. He'd assigned the core development to his handpicked team, led by a developer named Jago Sterling, a 6-year-old who coded fast and tested never. Crispin loved Jago because Jago never said no, never pushed back, never questioned whether speed was being prioritized over stability. I wasn't directly involved in Project Velocity. Crispin had deliberately structured it to root around my oversight. But as senior systems architect, I still had access to the repositories and the responsibility for the overall system integrity. So when I started noticing unusual patterns in our monitoring systems, micro-failures that resolved themselves, latency spikes that shouldn't exist, error logs that were being automatically suppressed, I did what I always did. I investigated. What I found made my blood run cold. The new code that Jago's team had been integrating wasn't just aggressive, it was fundamentally flawed. They'd rewritten core functions of our data validation system to prioritize speed, but in doing so, they'd created race conditions that could cause cascading failures. Worse, they disabled several of the fail-safe mechanisms I'd built into the original architecture because those safety checks slowed things down. It was like watching someone remove the brakes from a car because they added weight and reduced speed. Sure, the car goes faster right up until the moment you need to stop. I spent 3 days documenting everything I'd found. I built models showing exactly how the system could fail. I identified the specific code segments that needed to be rewritten. I prepared a comprehensive report with solutions ways we could achieve Crispin's performance goals without sacrificing stability. I presented it all to him in a private meeting, hoping that away from the pressure to perform for the board and investors, he might actually hear me. He barely looked at the documentation. "You went into Project Velocity's code without authorization," he said flatly. "I have authorization as systems architect to review any code that integrates with the core infrastructure," I replied. "Crispin, you need to understand what I'm showing you here. These race conditions are theoretical concerns based on your conservative assumptions," he interrupted. "Jago's team has run their own tests. The performance improvements are real. The launch timeline is set." He leaned forward. "And frankly, Eloin, this feels like another attempt to undermine my initiatives because you can't accept that your way isn't the only way." I felt my jaw tighten. This isn't about my way or your way. This is about code that will fail, not might fail, will fail. And when it does, it won't be a minor glitch. It'll be catastrophic. Your opinion is noted, he said in a tone that made clear my opinion was worth nothing. Project Velocity launches as scheduled in 2 weeks. I suggest you focus on your actual assigned projects and leave the innovation to people who aren't afraid of it. The meeting was over. I didn't give up. I couldn't. 12 years of protecting this system, of serving the clients who depended on us. I wasn't going to stand by and watch it all collapse because of one man's ego. I went over his head. I requested a meeting with Alaric Penhaligon, our founder. Getting on Alaric's calendar wasn't easy anymore. He'd been relegated to a corner office and board meetings, largely decorative in the new Vanguard. But his assistant, Angela, had been with the company as long as I had. She understood something was wrong when I told her it was urgent. Alaric listened to everything. He reviewed my documentation, asked thoughtful questions, and for a moment I felt hope. This was the man who'd built Vanguard on principles of quality and integrity. Surely he'd intervene. This is serious, Elowen, he said finally. I can see the potential for problems here. Then you'll delay the launch, mandate a proper review, he sighed, and that sigh told me everything before he spoke. I can bring your concerns to the board, but you have to understand my position has changed. Crispin was brought in because the board wanted aggressive growth. They've bought into his vision. If I try to override him on this, especially this close to launch, I'm not sure they'll back me. So, we just let this happen? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Alaric, you built this company on doing things right, not doing things fast. I built this company in a different era, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Elowen. I'll do what I can, but I need you to prepare for the possibility that Crispin's approach is the new reality at Vanguard. That meeting broke something in me, not my resolve but my illusions. The company I devoted 12 years to, that I'd poured my heart into protecting, no longer valued what I offered. I made one more attempt. I reached out to the board directly through official channels, submitting my findings as a formal risk assessment. Corporate protocol said board members were supposed to review significant risk flags from senior leadership. The response came not from the board, but from Crispin. I was called into his office the next morning. He was standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the London skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. I'm trying to decide, he said without turning around, whether you're incompetent or actively sabotaging this company. I'm doing my job, I replied, protecting our infrastructure and our clients. He turned, and the cold fury in his eyes was something new. You went to the board. You went around me, undermined my authority, and spread fear about a project you weren't even assigned to. That's not protection. That's insubordination. The board has a right to know about critical system risks. The board, he said, walking toward me slowly, has confidence in my leadership. They've seen the projections for Project Velocity. They understand that this company needs to evolve or die. What they don't need is a washed-up architect clinging to outdated methods and using scare tactics to maintain relevance. Washed up, outdated. The words were designed to wound, and they did. You have 2 choices, Crispin continued. You can be a team player, support Project Velocity's launch, and maybe salvage your career here. Or you can keep fighting this, in which case I'll have no choice but to conclude that you're no longer a good fit for Vanguard's future. I wanted to quit right there. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of his reckless leadership and his dangerous ego. But I thought about the system, about the thousands of clients who had no idea their data and operations were about to be put at risk. As long as I was still at Vanguard, I still had access. I could still potentially prevent the worst. I'll do my job, I said carefully. Project Velocity launched on schedule. For the first 72 hours, it seemed like maybe I'd been wrong. The system handled the increased load. Performance metrics looked good. Crispin was strutting around the office, accepting congratulations, already planning his next big initiative. I monitored everything obsessively, watching for the signatures of the problems I knew were lurking in the code. They were there, subtle but growing. Small inconsistencies in the data validation logs, timing anomalies that suggested race conditions were occurring but resolving before they cascaded. It was like watching a dam with tiny cracks. Everything looked fine until it didn't. On the fourth day, one of our major clients, Lombard Global, reported a data inconsistency. A batch of transaction records had duplicate entries. Not a huge problem, their team caught it during routine reconciliation and it was easily corrected, but I knew what it meant. The race conditions were starting to cause visible errors. I documented it. I traced it back to the exact code flaw I'd identified. I sent a detailed report to Crispin with a proposed patch that would fix the underlying issue. His response came back in 2 lines. Single incident with one client already resolved. No evidence of systemic issue. Focus on your assigned projects. 2 days later, 3 more clients reported similar issues. Different manifestations, same root cause. The cracks in the dam were spreading. I developed a comprehensive patch. It would require taking the system into maintenance mode for about 4 hours. Inconvenient, but manageable. The patch would fix the race conditions without rolling back Velocity's performance improvements. It was the solution that could save everything. I sent it to Crispin with increasing urgency. These errors are going to compound. We need to implement this fix before the problem scales. His reply: minor issues being blown out of proportion. Continue monitoring. He wasn't just ignoring the problem anymore. He was actively covering it up. I later learned he'd been pressuring client services to downplay the reports, to handle them quietly without escalating to the technical teams. By the end of week 2, we were getting error reports daily. Not from all clients, the race conditions were probabilistic, affecting maybe 5% of transactions under specific load conditions, but consistent enough that the pattern was undeniable. The proof came 2 weeks after launch, but not in a way any of us wanted. Stanhope Group, one of our top 10 clients, experienced a critical failure. Their entire data processing pipeline went down for 6 hours during peak business operations. The race condition had finally caused exactly the kind of cascading failure I'd warned about. Stanhope's CTO was furious. They were threatening to break their contract. The potential loss to Vanguard was enormous, not just Stanhope's substantial fees, but the reputation damage if other major clients started questioning our reliability. This, Crispin couldn't suppress. The incident automatically triggered executive-level alerts and board notifications. There was going to be an emergency meeting the next morning. Alaric, Crispin, the board's tech committee, and key department heads. I spent that entire night preparing. I compiled everything. My original risk assessment, the documented errors over the past 2 weeks, the Stanhope incident root cause analysis, and most importantly, my patch with clear explanations of how it would resolve the issue. The meeting started at 8:00 the morning. Crispin got there early and had clearly been preparing his own narrative. As people filed in, he was already framing the Stanhope incident as an unforeseeable anomaly. He described it as a 1-in-a-million confluence of factors that his team was already addressing. When Alaric asked me to present my findings, Crispin's jaw tightened, but he couldn't object with board members present. I walked everyone through it: the original code flaws, my warnings, the escalating errors, the direct line from the code I'd flagged to the Stanhope failure, and finally the solution, the patch that could prevent this from happening again. "How long have you had this patch ready?" asked Philip Monroe, the board member who chaired the tech committee. 2 weeks, I said. I've been requesting approval to implement it, but I was told the issues weren't systemic enough to warrant action. Every eye in the room turned to Crispin. His face had gone from confident to carefully neutral. We were gathering more data to ensure any fix addressed the actual problem rather than introducing new complications, he said. Aloan has a tendency toward overcautious reactions that can sometimes. The Stanhope failure cost us 6 hours of downtime and potentially an 8-figure client, Philip interrupted. That's not overcautious concern, that's accurate risk assessment. He turned to me. Can you implement this patch today? Before I could answer, Crispin cut in. With respect, Philip, implementation decisions should go through proper channels. My team needs to review any proposed changes to ensure they don't create additional Your team wrote the code that caused this failure, Alaric said quietly. It was the first time I'd heard him directly challenge Crispin in front of the board. I think Elowens earned the authority to fix it. The meeting concluded with authorization for me to implement the patch during that evening's maintenance window. Crispin said nothing as people filed out, but the look he gave me promised this wasn't over. I spent the afternoon preparing for the implementation. The patch was solid. I'd tested it in every simulation I could build, but I also knew that in complex systems, there's always risk when you introduce changes, even fixes. I built in extra monitoring and rollback procedures, triple-checking everything. At 5:30, an hour before the scheduled maintenance window, Crispin appeared in my workspace. The office had mostly cleared out. My team had gone home with plans to be on call remotely during the implementation. "We need to talk," Crispin said. It wasn't a request. He walked toward the server room, clearly expecting me to follow. I did, my stomach nodding. When the door closed behind us, sealing us in the quiet hum of machinery and climate control, he turned on me. "You've been trying to undermine me since day one," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Every initiative, every improvement, you fought me. And today, you tried to make me look incompetent in front of the board." "Today, I presented facts about a system failure," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "This isn't about you and me, Crispin. It's about protecting the infrastructure. Everything is about people, Elowen. You're either with leadership or you're against it. And you've made it very clear which side you're on." He stepped closer. "That patch you're planning to deploy, I've had Jago's team review it. They have concerns. Serious concerns about unintended interactions with other system components. That's impossible. They just got it this afternoon, and a proper review would take." "Are you questioning Jago's competence now, too?" Crispin's smile was sharp. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to postpone this implementation. Tell the board we need more testing time. My team will develop an alternative solution and we'll fix this the right way." I stared at him in disbelief. "The board authorized this implementation specifically because we can't afford more delays. Every day this code runs, we risk another Stanhope situation." "A risk I'm willing to manage," he said. "What I'm not willing to manage is you deploying code that could make things worse just to prove you were right all along." And there it was, the real issue. This wasn't about the patch or the system. This was about Crispin's inability to admit he'd been wrong and my refusal to let him cover it up. "I'm implementing the patch," I said, as authorized by the board and Alaric. "Deploy that patch and you're out." His voice echoed off the server room walls. "I don't care what your diagnostics say, Vance. We have investors watching, and I'm not going to let some paranoid systems architect derail this launch." The absurdity of calling it a launch when we were weeks past launch, when we were in damage control mode, would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. "You don't understand what you're asking," I said quietly. "What I understand," he snarled, "is that you're one keystroke away from the job center." The countdown timer on my screen showed 15 minutes until the maintenance window opened. 15 minutes to decide whether to save my career or save the system. Whether to bend to intimidation or trust. 12 years of expertise. I thought about my mom working 2 jobs but never compromising her principles. I thought about the neighbors in Sheffield who'd helped raise me, who taught me that community and integrity mattered more than comfort. I thought about the thousands of client companies, the millions of people who depended on systems like ours to do their jobs, to serve their customers, to run their businesses. And I thought about the Elowen Vance, who'd started at Vanguard 12 years ago, who'd promised herself she'd never become the kind of person who chose convenience over doing what was right. I looked at Crispin Thorne, this man who'd spent 2 years bulldozing over careful processes, who valued speed over stability, who saw people as obstacles or tools and nothing in between. "You're asking me to let a broken system keep running because fixing it might make you look bad," I said. "You're asking me to prioritize your ego over thousands of clients' operations. That's not something I can do." His face went red. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but at least I'll be able to sleep tonight." The maintenance window opened. I initiated the protocols, bringing the system into safe mode. Clients who'd been notified in advance saw their expected maintenance screen. The Nexus platform, the system I'd designed and protected for 12 years, was in my hands one last time. I deployed the patch. The implementation process took 43 minutes. Every status check came back green. The fix integrated exactly as designed, correcting the race conditions without disrupting the performance improvements Crispin had wanted. It was perfect, the solution that could have prevented everything if it had been deployed 2 weeks earlier. Then I logged off. I pulled my personal items from my desk drawer, a photo of my mum, a small succulent plant Angela had given me on my 10th anniversary, the award I'd received for the original Nexus platform design. I put them in my bag while Crispin stood there, still sputtering threats that no longer mattered. "You're fired," he finally managed. "Security will escort you out." "Security can meet me at the entrance," I replied. "I know the way." I walked out of that server room, through the office I'd spent 12 years helping to build. Past the desk where I'd worked late nights solving impossible problems. Past the conference room where I'd mentored dozens of younger developers. Past all of it, Angela was still at her desk. She saw my face, saw my bag, and understood immediately. "Elowen, take care of yourself," I told her. "And tell Alaric I'm sorry I couldn't save it." The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. I stepped out into the March evening, cool air hitting my face, carrying my small box of personal items and 12 years of memories. I had no idea what I was going to do next. No job lined up, no plan, just the certainty that I'd done the right thing and the terror of what that certainty had cost me. I didn't know yet that I wouldn't need a plan because the system I'd fixed was about to reveal just how badly Crispin had broken everything else. I slept terribly that night, not because I regretted my choice, but because my mind wouldn't stop running through scenarios. Would the patch hold? Had I missed something in my testing? Would Crispin find a way to blame me if anything went wrong? The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My first thought was panic. Something had gone wrong with the implementation. But as I started reading the messages, I realized the crisis had nothing to do with my patch. The messages were from former colleagues, from people I'd mentored, from contacts across the industry. They all said variations of the same thing. "Are you seeing this? And did you know?" And Vanguard is melting down. I opened my laptop to find that Vanguard Technologies was trending on tech news sites, but it wasn't about the Stanhope incident or about system failures related to Project Velocity. It was so much worse. While Crispin had been focused on my patch, while he'd been threatening me in the server room, while the attention had been on the race conditions I'd identified, a completely different catastrophe had been brewing. And this one was entirely his creation. 3 months earlier, around the same time Project Velocity had launched, Crispin had also pushed through another initiative. He'd called it Project Streamline. This one was supposed to optimize Vanguard's internal data management systems. It was the back-end architecture that handled everything from billing to user authentication to system logging. Crispin had assigned Project Streamline to another one of his favorites, a developer named Caspian Lowther. And just like with Project Velocity, Crispin had structured it to bypass the normal review processes, to move fast without the bottleneck of oversight from people like me. I'd heard about Project Streamline only peripherally. It was positioned as an internal efficiency update, not something that touched client-facing systems, so it hadn't triggered my architectural review requirements. I'd been too focused on the active threat of Project Velocity to dig into what seemed like a back-end housekeeping project. That had been a mistake, but it had been Crispin's strategy all along. Overwhelm the safeguards with multiple simultaneous initiatives so nothing got proper scrutiny. Project Streamline had included a reorganization of how Vanguard's systems stored and processed authentication credentials. Caspian had implemented a new encryption method that was supposed to be more efficient, but in the rush to deploy, they'd made a catastrophic error. During the migration from the old system to the new one, there had been a brief window, maybe 90 seconds, where credentials had been processed through both systems simultaneously for verification purposes. During that 90-second window, through a combination of logging errors and misconfigured temporary storage, Authentication credentials for approximately 47,000 user accounts had been written to system logs in partially encrypted format. Not plain text, but with weak enough encryption that anyone with moderate expertise could crack it. And those logs, due to another oversight in Project Streamline's configuration, had been included in a routine backup, stored on a server with inadequate security protocols. Someone had found it. Someone had cracked the encryption. And at 2:30 inches the morning, while I was tossing and turning thinking about my deployed patch, someone had dumped 47,000 Vanguard user credentials onto a public forum frequented by security researchers and hackers. By morning, it was chaos. The credentials included accounts for administrators at some of Vanguard's biggest clients. Within hours of the dump, there were reports of unauthorized access attempts and confirmed breaches. Pandemonium broke out as companies scrambled to lock down their systems. The response from Vanguard should have been immediate and coordinated. There should have been emergency protocols for credential breaches, notifications to affected clients, forced password resets, security audits, and public statements accepting responsibility. But Vanguard's emergency response protocols were among the things Crispin had streamlined over the past 2 years. The careful crisis management procedures Alaric had established had been replaced with a more agile approach that basically amounted to letting leadership handle things case by case. And the leader who should have been handling it was Crispin Thorne, who spent the first 6 hours after the breach became public trying to figure out how to minimize his personal exposure rather than minimize the damage. By the time Vanguard issued its first official statement, the tech news cycle had moved on. They had gone from reporting the breach to reporting Vanguard's inadequate response. Security researchers were publishing analyses of the exposed credentials. Clients were going public with their anger, and investigators started asking questions about how such a breach could happen at a company that had built its reputation on infrastructure security. The answers, when they came out, were damning. Journalists dug into Project Streamline. They found the rushed timeline, the bypassed security reviews, the dismissed concerns from Vanguard's own security team. They found emails where Crispin had overruled security protocols because they slowed down innovation. And then someone leaked my risk assessment about Project Velocity, the one I'd submitted to the board, the one that detailed a pattern of Crispin prioritizing speed over safety and systematically dismantling the careful processes that had kept Vanguard secure. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't just about one security breach. It was about a culture of recklessness at the leadership level, about a VP who had been warned repeatedly and had ignored those warnings, about a company that had lost its way. The stock price began to fall first a few percentage points, then more as the steadiest 4 Ts, that worry-gotted, as the scope of the breach became clear. By the end of the week, Vanguard had lost 40% of its market value. Clients started breaking contracts. Stanhope Group, already angry about their downtime, was among the first to announce they were migrating to a competitor. Others followed. The revenue projections that had made Crispin look like a visionary started crumbling. And then the lawsuits began. Clients suing for the security breach, shareholders suing for mismanagement, and employees who'd been laid off during Crispin's efficiency drive suing for wrongful termination. The board called an emergency meeting. This time, Crispin wasn't controlling the narrative. This time, Alaric came prepared with documentation of every warning that had been ignored, every protocol that had been dismantled, and every person who'd been silenced for raising concerns. My name came up repeatedly. The architect who'd maintained 12 years of perfect uptime until new leadership had sidelined her expertise. The security-minded voice who'd been fired for deploying a fix that had actually worked exactly as promised. Because by now, multiple analysts had confirmed that my patch had successfully resolved the Project Velocity issues with 0 negative consequences. The board asked Alaric where I was now. He had to tell them I'd been terminated the night I deployed the patch, the night I'd saved the one thing Crispin wouldn't let me save. Crispin Thorne was fired on a Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after I'd walked out of the Vanguard offices. The announcement was brief and clinical. Effective immediately, and pursuing other opportunities. There was no thank you for his service, no acknowledgement of his initiatives, Just a clean severance, legal and cold. But that was just the beginning of his reckoning. The lawsuits named him personally. The Financial Conduct Authority opened an investigation into whether he'd misrepresented Vanguard's security practices to investors. The tech industry, which had celebrated his aggressive approach to innovation, now treated him as a cautionary tale. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to land at other companies, but the Vanguard disaster had made him radioactive. The once rising VP with the golden CV couldn't get interviews. His name had become synonymous with the dangers of unchecked ego and reckless leadership. Meanwhile, the full scope of the damage from the credential breach was becoming clear. The financial impact to Vanguard and its clients was eventually calculated at £115 million. Some of that was direct loss from breaches and system compromises. More of it was the cascade effect: lost contracts, legal settlements, emergency security overhauls, and the obliteration of Vanguard's reputation. £115 million because Crispin Thorne had been in too much of a hurry to do things right. As for me, I spent the first week after my termination in a strange state of limbo. I was angry at what had happened, vindicated by how clearly I'd been right, and terrified about what came next for my career. Getting fired, even for the right reasons, isn't something that looks great on a CV. But then my phone started ringing. The first call came from Alaric Penhaligon. "Elowen, I need you to hear this from me personally," he said. "I'm sorry. I should have backed you harder. I knew you were right, and I let politics and board pressure stop me from doing what I knew was necessary. That's on me." I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change what had happened. "I appreciate you saying that, Alaric. It's not just words. The board has asked me to step back into an active leadership role while we rebuild, and I'm not doing it without you. I want you back at Vanguard as Chief Technology Officer, full authority over all technical operations, reporting directly to me, with a compensation package that reflects how badly we need your expertise. CTO, the role that should have been mine years ago if merit rather than politics had mattered." "I need time to think about it," I said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." But before I could seriously consider Alaric's offer, other calls started coming. Headhunters, competitors, and tech companies who'd been watching the Vanguard implosion and drawing conclusions about what kind of leader I must be to have fought so hard against it. One of the calls was from Caledonian Systems, one of Vanguard's biggest competitors. Their CEO, a woman named Simone Thatcher, had followed the whole story. "We've been looking for someone to lead our infrastructure division," she told me. "Someone who understands that sustainable growth means building things right, not just building them fast. Your track record speaks for itself. And frankly, the fact that you are willing to lose your job to protect your system's integrity tells me everything I need to know about your character." The offer from Caledonian was extraordinary. Better title than Alaric was offering, better compensation, and perhaps most importantly, a company that hadn't just learned the hard way about valuing careful expertise. They'd been practicing it all along. I took the Caledonian offer. It wasn't an easy decision. There was a part of me that felt loyal to Alaric, to the early days of Vanguard when we'd all believed we were building something special. But Vanguard had become something different, and even with Crispin gone, it would take years to undo the damage and rebuild the culture. Caledonian represented a fresh start with people who already shared my values. I didn't have to convince them that thoroughness mattered. I didn't have to fight for the right to do things correctly. I could just build. 3 months into my new role at Caledonian, I was in my office when my assistant told me someone was in the lobby asking to see me. "He says his name is Crispin Thorne." I could have refused. I could have had security escort him out, but curiosity won. I told my assistant to give me 5 minutes, then show him in. Crispin looked different. The swagger was gone. He was wearing an expensive suit that somehow looked rumpled, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Elowen," he said. "Thank you for seeing me." I didn't offer him a seat. I just waited. "I owe you an apology," he continued, "for everything. You were right about project velocity. You were right about the need for careful processes. You were trying to protect the company, and I was too arrogant to see it. I could have accepted the apology graciously. I could have said something about how we all make mistakes and hopefully we all learn from them, but I didn't feel particularly gracious. I felt like the woman who'd spent 2 years being dismissed, undermined, and finally fired for being right. "Why are you here, Crispin? What do you want from me?" He hesitated. "I'm trying to put together some consulting work, small companies, helping them scale their tech operations. I was hoping you might be willing to provide a professional reference or maybe even recommend me to some of your contacts who might need that kind of help." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. The man who'd fired me, who'd called me washed up and outdated, was now asking me to help resurrect his career. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to tell potential clients that you're someone they should trust with their technical operations based on your track record at Vanguard?" He flinched. "I've learned from those mistakes. I understand now what you were trying to tell me." "You understand now?" I repeated. "After 115 pounds million in damage? After 47,000 people had their credentials compromised? After you fired the person who could have prevented at least some of it? Now you understand? Elowen, please." "No," I said firmly. "Here's what I understand, Crispin. You didn't come here because you've genuinely learned anything. You came here because you're desperate and you think I'm enough of a pushover that I might help you anyway. But here's the thing you never understood about me, about people like me. Being kind isn't the same as being weak. Having empathy doesn't mean accepting disrespect. And standing up for what's right sometimes means standing firm when someone who wronged you asks for mercy they didn't show anyone else." His face had gone red. The old Crispin, the one who intimidated and bullied, flickered across his expression, but he couldn't afford anger anymore. He needed me, and we both knew it. "I can't give you a reference because I don't believe in the kind of leadership you represent," I continued. "I won't recommend you to my contacts because I actually care about their success, and I've seen what happens when you're in charge. You had every opportunity to do things right at Vanguard. You had experienced people trying to guide you. You chose ego over expertise every single time. So that's it," he said bitterly. "You're just going to block me from rebuilding my career. I'm not blocking anything. I'm simply declining to help you, which is my right. You built your reputation yourself, Crispin. The consequences of that reputation are yours to handle." He stood there another moment, clearly hoping I might soften. When I didn't, he turned and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. "You know what your problem is, Elowen?" he said. One last attempt to wound me. "You're so focused on being right that you can't see the bigger picture. You could have been great if you'd just been willing to take risks." I smiled. "I took the biggest risk of my career when I deployed that patch knowing you'd fire me for it. The difference between us is I took that risk to protect something bigger than myself. Your risks were always about protecting your ego. That's why I'm here and you're begging for references." He left without another word. I never saw him again. Standing in that office, watching Crispin Thorne walk away for the last time, I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph exactly, but peace. 12 years of building something that mattered. 2 years of fighting to protect it. One choice that cost me everything and proved I'd been right all along. The payback wasn't just that Crispin lost his career while mine flourished, it was that integrity won. In an industry that talks endlessly about innovation and disruption, about moving fast and breaking things, sometimes the real revolution is simply refusing to compromise on doing things right. Crispin thought he was building a legacy. Instead, he became a warning. And me? I became proof that standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. The system I fixed ran flawlessly. My patch solved the problem exactly as I'd promised. 0 negative consequences, just like I'd said. While Crispin's shortcuts resulted in 115 pounds million in damage, 47,000 compromised credentials, thousands of affected clients, and the complete destruction of a company's reputation. The difference between us was never about talent or vision. It was about character, about whether you build for ego or for impact, about whether you value being right or doing right. I chose integrity over intimidation, expertise over ego, and in the end, Reality proved me right in the most public, undeniable way possible. That's the real payback. Not revenge, but vindication. Not getting even, but being proven right. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a choice between doing what's easy and doing what's right, I hope you'll join our community here at Payback Office Channel. We're building something real here, a space where integrity still matters, where standing up for what's right is celebrated instead of punished, where people understand that sometimes the best payback is simply being proven right. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach 7,000 subscribers who believe that doing the right thing always matters, even when it costs you everything first. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And remember, you're stronger than the people trying to intimidate you, and your integrity is worth more than any job that asks you to compromise.